walks away after winning his 100th game as the head coach here at Notre Dame.
The reason I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, I was born in this country. It isn't what you have, it's what you're taught about the values of life.
We trying to save souls.
So there's a rule in life that said you're either growing or you're dying. And like an old friend once said, we as Americans need to start winning again. Everyone should ask this question. Am I willing to endure the pain and the suffering and the sacrifice it takes to be a champion? Greetings and welcome to the Lou Holtz podcast. Those of you who have heard us before realize this is not a political show. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, whatever else the case may be. It's about restoring America's culture back to greatness. That's all we're trying to do. And we bring guests on here who have really achieved the impossible dream. Our guest today is somebody I admire and respect, who we coached against him when he was at the Air Force Academy. I want to tell you, we couldn't even hold him, let alone block him. He had 24 sacks his senior year, but Chad Hennings is just an outstanding individual, great success, and you're going to be amazed at his story. You want to talk about unselfishness? An individual was a great college football player, but also dedicated to this country as well. And football had to wait, but didn't have to wait long because he had a great career. So let me start off. Welcome, Chad Hennings, to the Lou Holtz podcast. Excellence isn't a destination, it's an identity. Chad Hennings lived this message to a 9-year NFL career and 3 Super Bowl championships with the Dallas Cowboys, 45 combat missions flying the A-10 Warthog with the Air Force. He is a respected businessman in commercial real estate. Chad has taken this message around the world, and he is the founder of the Wingmen Ministries, an organization that encourages discipline and mentorship of men. Chad and his wife Tammy have a son and daughter. They reside in Texas. It's an honor to have you on our show today. And I want to thank you for your service to our country and commend you on an incredible football career and your best-selling book. You want to tell us about your best-selling book?
Well, I've written a couple books,
See, I've written more than I've read.
That's great. No, but 2 of my books, Forces of Character was my last one, and this is the one where I sat down with 10 people that I admired that had an impact on my life. One of the individuals you just mentioned, individuals that a lot of your listeners could probably remember, individuals like Roger Staubach, Troy Aikman, Jason Garrett, Greg Popovich, coach for the Spurs, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. I interviewed a survivor of Auschwitz, a human rights attorney from former communist Romania, an astronaut, the CEO for National Center on Fathering, Carrie Casey, and a homelessness expert in Dallas. And I talked to these people, they're male, female, black, white, similar to what you said in your intro about your program, where you don't care what their background is, but all these individuals exemplified and lived a life of character. And I wanted to know what those commonalities in their lives were and how they're passing that message on to the next generation.
Can you imagine how great this country would be if everybody had their attitude, your attitude towards this country, towards excellence, towards caring about others?
Amen. Amen.
Now, Chad in the Air Force, he led the nation with 24 sacks. He received the Outland Trophy during the 87 season. When graduation came around, you had already been drafted by the Cowboys. You had to turn that aside so you could serve your country first. Can you tell us what motivated you to serve your country and what it was like to delay your NFL career? Before you answer that, I was an officer in the Army, and I want to tell you, this country would be better off if everybody had to serve a couple of years in the military where you learn to be unselfish and you learn to put other people ahead of us. But what you have done, you made the ultimate sacrifice. What was that like to know? I can go to the NFL, but no, I've got to go fight for this country. What was your thought?
My commitment was 8 years, but this is how I call it a God thing, guys, just because the wall came down from Berlin. Soviet Union is now no more. The Cold War scenario is essentially over. We just did our thing. Then our armed forces are trying to downsize. Not enough guys get out, so they made waivers. they waived my commitment time. So I went from 8 years to 4 years. And this is where I raised it's a crazy story how it all went down, but I raised my hand and said, hey, I'll get out of the Cowboys. Jerry Jones had just bought the team from Clint Murchison and, Tex Schramm and Coach Landry at the time in 89. And I'm like, are you guys, do you know who I am or whatnot? But they said, yeah, well, come on, we'll give you workouts. Within 3 weeks, I was processed out of the Air Force, moved my wife and myself from England back to the States, getting ready to go for first training camp.
For me, Coach, it was at that time a crisis of belief for me. And I say that in regards to what type of man did I profess that I was going to espouse to be, and did my actions live up to my words? Attending a service academy, you're taught, duty, honor, country, service before self, excellence in all we do, Air Force's core values. And for me, it was one of those things, did I want to put my money where my mouth is? I could have probably lawyered up, tried to get out of my commitment. I had a minimum of a 5-year military commitment, but I chose to up that to 8 years because I wanted to fly jets. I wanted to be a pilot. So technically playing in the NFL was never going to be an option for me because I would have been 32 years old before. You don't see too many 32-year-old rookies in the NFL. So for me, it was a conscious choice, is that the NFL, even though being drafted by the Cowboys, which I admired, and the opportunity to play for America's team was certainly there, but I said that, for me, for my future family, I am going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to fulfill my word, my commitment, because I raised my hand to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that, for me, was paramount.
Well, I want to tell you, if everybody in this country said, once you make a commitment to a wife, to a child, whatever, to a company, once you make that commitment, you honor the commitment. The way I see today, one of the problems we have in this country, people make a commitment for 20 seconds, and then it passes by.
Yep, unfortunately, and that's because it's all about me.
It is all about me, and that's a great thing. I learned more in a college on a college football field than I ever learned in a college classroom, and I learned more in the military than any other place. As a matter of fact, the military is how I formulated my coaching philosophy. Your obligation to your teammate. You may not want to fail, you may not want to succeed, but you don't have the right to cause other people to fail because you don't fulfill your commitment. I learned all that in the military. Now, my show is about pursuing the American dream and taking personal responsibility for your life, which you obviously have done. You took this quite literally and volunteered to serve your country and flew 45 combat missions in the Air Force. I want to thank you for the service and ask if you could share about your time in the Air Force and what it was like flying those missions.
First of all, I'm not your typical fighter pilot from a physical stature. I had to receive waivers for my height and weight.
I got to tell you, when we played, I said, how big is that damn cockpit they have? Had all these big guys, but go ahead.
No, but I had to receive waivers for my flight and weight to be able, because I was too tall and too heavy for the ACES 2 ejection seat that they had in the plane. And actually, funny story that when I was going through pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, my instructor pilots, the chief flight surgeon came up to me during the second week I was flying the initial jet trainer and said, we had to go back and check the design specifications of the ejection seat because we're not sure if you clear the tail if you ever had to punch out of the aircraft. So we'd actually briefed that if we were in a controlled ejection situation, which is an oxymoron for a controlled crash, we'd go to a controlled bailout area, roll the aircraft inverted, upside down, then pull the ejection handles to allow the extra G of the Earth's gravitational force to help pull me out of the plane. Think about that one, Coach.
What?
No, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time. The life lessons that were reinforced that I learned being a fighter pilot, the missions that I flew in the first Gulf War, flying out of Incirlik, Turkey, in the northern part of Iraq. For me, it was paramount, and it was part of my development, because if I would have gone into the NFL right out of college, I don't think I wasn't mature physically, emotionally, certainly spiritually. And having had those experiences of, leading a flight of, a wingman and doing a training or a combat mission of putting on the weight. I mean, I grew holistically as a human being during that time, and that's what really helped me eventually succeed in my career as a defensive lineman for the Cowboys.
I have been to 17 countries visiting with the troops, and I've been to Incirlik, Turkey. And I want to tell you, there's nothing there except it was very, very hot. But thanks for all you've done. And did you have a lot of intrepidation before a mission?
No. I remember the advice.
What?
An old, my mentor at the Air Force Academy, his name was Bob Earthquake Titus, General Titus. He was a fighter pilot, flew missions in Korea and Vietnam, had actually shot down 3 MiGs in Vietnam. And he shared with me one time, he goes, Chad, before every mission I flew, it's just God, he prayed this prayer, God, it's not about me, but help me complete my mission. Take care of my men and help me complete my mission. And I remember my first mission that I was getting ready to fly, and I thought, the Holy Spirit brought that into my mind. It's like, this is what I'm going to pray. And I did, and it was totally at peace. And you get to the point where, I don't know, you as a coach, and you're coaching your kids, playing the big game, the big bowl game, or they're playing in a Super Bowl. It's not about all the grandiose stuff that's happening all around you. It's that myopic vision to concentrate on just doing your duty, taking that one moment at a time, concentrating on what's ahead of you. And I was able to do that. I was able to focus.
But that's a problem. So many people today can't. They get caught up with all the peripheral things, and they worry about the things that aren't really important.
Well, and that's the advent of these silly devices,
You're right.
social media and the internet, and particularly that's the catastrophe that's going through with our young kids today, is the addictions that they have with that. They're not allowing kids to be resilient as they grow up. And that's one of the biggest tragedies that we have to address as a nation, is most certainly that.
Oh, I agree with you completely. Chad, following your amazing time in service, you had an amazing football career. I understood you flew your last mission in Iraq and played in your first Super Bowl the same year. What was that like, and how was the transition to the NFL?
Yeah, we have a saying, it's kind of drinking by the fire hose, making that transition. And again, it was that maturity that I gained. I was a combat fighter pilot, flew 45 missions, flying the A-10. I was responsible for millions of dollars of equipment for the Air Force. I was responsible for other people's lives. So going into playing for the Cowboys, for me, it was the physical aspect was probably the biggest adjustment that I had to make. And you can appreciate this, Coach. I went from living in England, in the United Kingdom, where if it got above 78 degrees
Were
over
you
there,
at Upper Hayforth?
I was at RA Bentwaters Woodbridge.
Okay.
With the 92nd Tactical Fighter Squadron, 81st Tactical Fighter Wing. But in Europe, if it gets above 80 degrees, people die because they don't have central air conditioning in a lot of their homes. I went from that going to training camp in Austin, Texas, where it's 98 degrees, upper high humidity. And it wouldn't be anything for me to lose 14 pounds in 1 2-hour practice.
Oh, my.
That sweat that much. So I had to learn pretty quick about adaptability and resiliency and all that stuff. But for me, it was a big transition, and it honed. This is what drives me crazy sometimes with parents with their kids, is they don't allow their kids to struggle, to suffer, to have to go through. They want to fix and cure everything for them. And for me, that's where I've learned so much in my life, is through that struggle, through that adversity, having to overcome obstacles, failing, and continuing to get up and press on. And for me, that whole process was instrumental. And one more, Jimmy Johnson, Coach.
Oh, yeah, coached against him.
Yeah, yes, you did. That's right. We don't want to diverge into that with the bad boys of Miami. But Coach, my first 8 games that I made the team as a rookie, my first 8 games, I was inactive. I was standing in civilian clothes, standing on the sidelines. I didn't even get a dress for the games. And here I was, as you alluded my bio, as a college, I was a unanimous All-American, Outland Trophy winner, projected first-round draft, all this stuff. And here I'm not even able to dress. So you talk about a blow to your ego. But for me, I realized that from my Air Force training, growing up as a kid on a farm, it's you do whatever you got to do to help the team.
Amen.
I went to Coach Johnson and said, Coach, I'll do whatever it takes to help contribute. I'll play special teams. As a defensive tackle, he had me running down kickoffs and doing punt and all these different things to volunteer to do that. That's how I worked my way in to eventually in a starting position and a role for the Cowboys. And that's where I tell young people, do whatever it takes. Put ego aside. It's the mission, the purpose that paramounts everything else.
There's such a correlation between successful people because they all had to overcome adversity, difficulty, etc. And Tim Brown was drafted in the first round by the Oakland Raiders. And the head of the whole organization, just win, baby, win. Tim called me. He said, Coach, Al Davis doesn't think I'm tough enough to play for him. I said, Tim, you make an appointment. You go in. You see Mr. Davis. Say, Miss Davis, your motto is win, baby, win. I can help you win. Why won't you let me? They put him back. He ran back a punt for a touchdown the first game. After that, it's basically history. But you're going to have adversity. You're going to have difficulty. I agree with you. Too many parents want to protect their children. You're not always going to be first team. You're not always going to have everything go for you. And people are going to say negative things. You learn to rise above it. You got to believe in yourself. That is what I'm talking about. This country has got to get back to where adversity is part of our life and we learn from it and we grow from it and move on. I want to talk to you about the Cowboys. You wanted to win 3 Super Bowls in 93, 94, 96. I want to know what made that team so special. How did you guys pull all those wins? Because in 89, the Cowboys had their worst record in team history. So how did you guys pull off 3 wins just 4 years later? Because I remember when they were bad under Tom Landry.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that creep, that mission creep, they got away from being who the Cowboys were professed to be as America's team. But I think Coach Johnson, there was several things. Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson, they had that chemistry and they had the ability to work together initially. They got a lot of great draft picks from the Herschel Walker trade, but the thing that they drafted was talent. And I'll tell you, Coach, I played with, on those teams, 7 Hall of Famers in the NFL on those one teams in the early 90s. 7 of those guys made the NFL Hall of Fame. So what I'm saying is, but even though they're phenomenal athletes as individuals, I've never been around a group of more selfless individuals in my life. Their work ethic in the weight room, in the off season, putting the time in, bettering themselves, bettering their craft, bettering themselves to be whatever position and role they played. But it was all about the team. It was all about the team. They wanted all phases. Michael Irvin wanted to be, he wanted the ball, but he wasn't selfless. Like, give me the ball every time. Emmitt Smith, Troy Aikman, on the offense, those guys clicked because they did whatever it took for the team to win. And our attitude was not just win games, but we were there to win Super Bowls. That's what Coach Johnson instilled in a lot of us, was that aspect of excellence. You got to set your bar, set your standards high enough that that's what you want to achieve every year. And if we didn't win a Super Bowl every year, it was a disappointment. That was the attitude and the mindset that we had.
Wouldn't it be great if this country had that same mentality? If people understood, let's be the best we can be. I may not be All-American. I may not be an A student, but you can be the best you're capable of being. That's what we should strive for. Not everybody going to be all-pro, but everybody can be the very best they're capable of being as a father, as a husband, as a worker, as a provider.
Amen. And that's one of the things that I talk in the intro about, living a life of excellence. First and foremost, for me, it was, strong sense of identity and purpose, but living to be your best self every day, encouraging others to do the same, and the organizations that you're affiliated with, whether that's family, work, encourage those organizations to live to a higher noble purpose or cause beyond themselves. And it's right. You don't have your A game every day.
You
don't, but you can go out and give it your best shot.
That's
and sometimes that's the best that is needed at that point in time.
Now, people may not be aware of the sacrifice it takes to go to the academy, the Air Force Academy. And I happen to know because we played you each and every year. And we'd go out there and you painted the visiting locker room in light blue. I always wanted to paint the damn thing red after we won the game because it upset me. But the sacrifice that you make to be at the academy, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
It was that everything that your show is about, it's about selfless service. It's service before self. And that's one of the great things that was instilled in us and emphasized for us was that it's all about the mission, the purpose. What is your role in the mission and purpose of whatever you choose to do, whether that be a fighter pilot or go on to be a medical doctor, a security policeman, special forces, whatnot. And that's with that mindset that it's not about you, that it's about elevating and lifting others, it transcends the whole culture that we are in. It's about selflessness, and it's about that. And I'll tell you, if you don't mind, I'd like to just read. I've become a big fan of a social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. You may have heard of Haidt. He's a professor out of the Stearns Business School, NYU. But he's written several great books, but he always quotes this gentleman, a pioneer sociologist out of Europe, a gentleman by the name of Emil Durkheim, who traveled all over Western Europe in the latter part of the 19th century, so 120 plus years ago, where he studied communities, cultures. And he found where there wasn't a common moral foundation, a common sense of core values and purpose in those communities, there was a decrease in happiness and an increase in suicide. You look at our country today, Coach, what you're epitomizing. Increase in suicide.
Would you please repeat that again, what he said?
He said there was a decrease in happiness and an increase in suicide. He concluded that we need obligations and constraints to provide structure and meaning to our lives. And this is what I wanted to share with you. And this is why our country and what you're alluding to in all your questions are. He said that the more weakened the groups to which a man belongs, the less he depends on them, the more he consequently depends only on himself and recognizes no other rules of conduct than what are founded in his own private interests. In other words, it's all about me. It's me, me, me. And you look at our country today, in our culture, it's all about me. It's not the selfless servant attitudes that we had growing up. That I had growing up.
People ask me, what's the difference between athletes today and 40 years ago? I said the same difference I see in society. Today, everybody wants to talk about their rights and their privileges. 40 years ago, we talked about our obligations and our responsibilities, but we seem to forget that by today. Now, you're quoted once saying, manhood is the vehicle to the kind of life men are supposed to lead. Where our most important missions are love of God, love of spouse, love of family, love of community, love of country. I find this very admirable, but I also find that is the purpose of this podcast, is to try to get people to understand what you have expressed so eloquently.
And that's part of the reason why I do what I do in my life. I've realized that I had mentors. I had coaches. I look back, Coach, and I look at all the men that impacted my life, aside from my parents and my grandparents, and they were my coaches. Fisher DeBerry, who you know very well.
Oh, great guy.
Phenomenal man. And just how he modeled his life. And that's, for me, we need to get back to modeling discipleship, mentorship of young men. And it's not about making the money. It's not about making bank and prestige and fame. It's about, again, service, discipleship. It's about changing people's lives. I make an analogy that, I see a lot of, it's a sports metaphor analogy, that when you're in your teens and your 20s, you're that young man that's trying to go out and earn his way on the team. You're like a freshman, or you're like a rookie on the team. You're trying to just learn the offense, the defense, trying to figure out your role. When you're in your 30s and your 40s, you're then kind of that captain of the team. You're that senior. You're that individual that realizes, okay, for my success, we need to start to elevate others, because it's about the team. When the team does well, then we as individuals can reap the benefits of that. Then when you're in your 50s and kind of your 60s, and I'm starting to be that senior statesman now too, you're that coach where I look back on and say, I've been there, done that, but now it's time for me to elevate others, to lift others up, to encourage others, to coach up other young men. And that's my purpose that I feel in my life now, is primarily that. And that's what we are lacking in our society.
That's probably the most important role you've had, even though you're a great football player, but helping young people decide what they have to do and how they have to do it. I only had 3 rules. Do the very best you possibly can at everything. You may not be an A student, you can be the best you can be. Number 2, let's follow the rules and letters of the responsibilities we have. Let's make sure we do the right thing. Why is it important to do the right thing? So that people can trust us. But the most important rule, let's love one another. If you're never going to meet anybody again, doesn't need a smile, kind word, encouragement. We all have difficulty. That's life. It's been able to overcome that as you move on. Now you have a beautiful family. Tell us about your wife and your children.
Married for 34 years. My bride, Tammy, she's followed me through thick and thin. I mean, she was a Colorado girl. I met her before I graduated from the Air Force Academy. She'd never really traveled outside of Colorado. And then we get married, and, oh, honey, by the way, I'm deployed to Europe. You're coming with me. So I drug her away for 2 years, and then she's a small town country girl. And then we move her from England back to Dallas, living in a big city. Now your husband's, noted athlete within a big metropolitan area. So she has been with me through thick and thin. And I have a son named Chase, who's 30 years old, and a daughter, Brenna, who's 27. And I just became a grandpa for the first time. My daughter had a baby boy a month ago. So
wonderful.
Beautiful. And I'm very fortunate and blessed that my kids all live within about 25 minutes of us. So we get to see them all the time. We go to church together. I mean, we live life together.
Many years ago, I was told, Lou Holtz, I don't care what you accomplish in this world. I don't care how many championships you win. If you aren't successful as a husband and a father, you have failed. And I always looked at that was my number one obligation. One, to win championships, was to be a good husband and a good father. And that is so critical. Now, as you reflect back on your military career, what would you say to men who are considering joining the military today? These people are considering joining the military, and you've got to remember this. The military is gone downhill in number of people want to be part of it. I can't tell you why, except it goes back to the values of this country and where we put our emphasis. What would you say to them?
I'm torn. I'm torn. In years past, I would highly encourage young people to go join the military because of what you alluded to. You learn the sense of sacrifice, of serving. You learn how to, not only a trade, but you learn many intangible characteristics. But today, the culture, unfortunately, our culture in our country has penetrated our military, which used to be a very esteemed institution, and it's impacted it with the many, what I believe are gross and negligent policies that have attributed to that decline, that young people today, they don't want to sign up because it's not the same military that their father, their grandfather, their uncles had served in. I'm torn. I love my country. I want to serve my country. But unfortunately, it seems like depending upon whatever executive is in the Oval Office, it ebbs and flows to that political spectrum, to that political side. And the mission and purpose of the military is, well, again, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States as individuals, but it's to be a lethal force, to be utilized as a last ditch in diplomacy to go out and to wreak havoc. And it's not about social, whatever you believe you profess to be, and it's not about a social experimentation. That is the mission and purpose. Anything that distracts from that mission and purpose is a distraction. And you should not allow that within the military. So if it's not, and again, it's not about the me, it's about the purpose. That's why you go through basic training. You break people down, get rid of their individual identities so they can be a part of the machine, the whole.
And your obligation to your fellow soldier is greater than your obligation to yourself. That's what you learn. And I want to thank you, because I tell you, you're so honest. The way you just answered that, I agree with you completely, but most people would have been, oh, I want to be politically correct. I don't worry about being politically correct. I worry about being correct. And I'll tell you what, this country, we got to get back to the basic fundamentals. That's why the whole purpose of this podcast is, what do we have to do to create the culture? You know, you're on great teams. You had great teams at the Air Force Academy. You had great teams at the Cowboys. But the one thing you understood also, every one of those teams had a culture where the players took charge of the culture, and you encouraged the players, and you worried about each other. I worry about the culture of this country, which has gone downhill. What do we have to do to bring it back?
You talk about my transparency. I'll be very transparent in this regard. I believe the church needs to step up. It has abdicated its role in culture. We cannot legislate morality. Culture is supposed to mirror the church. The church, unfortunately, today, in my opinion, in America, is mirroring culture. That is negligent. And to do that, we need men to stand up that profess, because the main mission of the church, at the Great Commission, that as a Christian, that Christ told us in Matthew 28, go and make disciples. What is that? Baptize and teach. Teaching means it's the koinonia, it's the fellowship to walk through life together with others. We need to be modeling that to young men. And unfortunately, I'm not going to knock the church, but the church is more concerned about the experience, getting people saved, than they are about transforming and changing lives. And that, we are Christ's hands and feet. And for me, that's the biggest thing that we need to do. The church needs to step up and not be worried about how they look to society.
I'll tell you, I've never said this before to any guest, but when it comes to voting for president, I may write your name in, because you expound on things that I believe in deeply.
Amen. And I'll share this with you. I was thinking about this today regarding where the American church is today. I'm a huge fan of Oswald Chambers and his devotional, My Utmost for His Highest. If
yes,
you've read that.
I'm familiar with that.
But this hits, he said, to the church today, he was talking, this is 100 years ago, he said, it's all about the experience. Come experience worship. Come get a prophetic word. Hear a great message. They are missing out on the one goal of our worship himself, and that's God himself. Chamber, he nails it when he says, are you thirsty or complacent, indifferent, so satisfied with your own experience that you want nothing more of God? Experience is a doorway, not a final goal. Beware of building your faith on experience. So, and that's, when you go to these churches, sometimes I speak at different men's conferences, and they'll have churches that'll roll a tank in, or they'll have, they'll do all these extravagant things to entertain people. It's like, no. Well, you're in a perpetual state of adolescence with some of these young men. It's like, train them to be men, mighty men of God. And we can, I don't want to go off on the whole thing I'm preaching here, but
let me tell you what really worries me as we close. Is first thing, the communists say you got to get rid of the family. You got to get rid of the family, and then you have to get rid of God. And then government becomes people's God because they look to them for everything. And that's not it. We have to look at ourselves and have a faith and a belief.
Amen.
Boy, you've been just a tremendous guy. This show may go into the Hall of Fame. I mean that sincerely, because you have just done a tremendous job in capturing what I believe in. So thank you so much for having me. And
it is an honor.
I want to tell you,
it is an honor.
As I said, we couldn't even hold you, let alone block you, but we tried. I tell you, the Taoist, was that
the Taoist? Yes.
We're still chasing him, but we're fortunate.
Thank you, Coach.
Thank you so much. And this was a show that I hope you'll go back and re-listen to, because there's so much valuable information in here. Chad, can't thank you enough. God bless you.
Thank you.
And he walks away after winning his 100th game as the head coach here at Notre Dame.
The reason I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, I was born in this country. It isn't what you have, it's what you're taught about the values of life.
We trying to save souls.
So there's a rule in life that you're either growing or you're dying. And like an old friend once said, we as Americans need to start winning again. Everyone should ask this question. Am I willing to endure the pain and the suffering and the sacrifice it takes to be a champion?